Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Som TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. Well, St. Patrick's Day is coming very soon, and to celebrate, I am going to have one of Som TV podcast's favorite guests, Jonah Beer, on to talk about the biggest cliche. His last name is Beer. We're going to talk about Guinness. So Guinness clever. Being so clever. Hey, this is my intro. You stay out of it.
Sorry.
And so Guinness is like, it's a thing that I think universally people think of Ireland. They think of the Irish. They think of the fact that it is absolutely delicious. So it's a great excuse to talk about one of our favorite things. I had to ask Jonah to put down his Amstel Light for this, so it's a really rare occasion to get him to do that. Before we talk about Guinness, the history, how incredibly wonderful this beverage is, and our personal stories with our relationship with this drink, I do want to say Jonah himself has a new Sommelier's Notebook on Som TV right now about soil and all of the geology in vineyards. If that sounded boring, I can promise you need to check this out because it's not. It is very funny and great and very educational, but in a way that I just have not seen. That's streaming on Som TV right now. Of course, we have several feature films, including The Whole Animal, coming next month. We have Saving the Restaurant, about everybody dealing with COVID during some very dark times over the last 2 years from the perspective of Bobby Stuckey, who's a great restaurateur, and hundreds of hours of other content that we look forward to showing you. Go to somtv.com, $49.99 for the entire year. Without further ado, Jonah, now you can jump in. You're allowed to talk now.
Now I'm allowed to talk. That's why you need to have a mute button on me, I think. So
No, it's good. No, because during those intros and outros, it's kind of like, I love doing them live when the guest is there because it's really awkward. I can say whatever I want. There's this like energy of, can I speak? All right, so Guinness. Yeah. Guinness. Is this appropriate for, we're going to talk about St. Patrick's Day, which, I'll try to keep my feelings about this holiday, which I have some very mixed ones about, out of this, though I'm sure it'll spill in. Is Guinness the right thing to talk about? We're not talking about whiskey. We're not talking about Shamrock Shakes. Is Guinness right?
I think Guinness is right. I think Guinness is right from the standpoint of, obviously Irish whiskey would be a great topic too. We could go on about that and we could get really loaded. But it's 9 a.m. By the way, people who listening, it's 9 a.m. and we're about to start the day with a beer. So honestly, I feel like that's what makes this the appropriate thing. It's 9:17 a.m. It is definitely the right time to be cracking open a Guinness. And, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, a little bit later. But the first time I went to Ireland with the intent of just drinking Guinness, we had a rule that we had to have our first pint down by 10. So I feel like the 25-year-old me would be very impressed that the 47-year-old me is sticking with the early in the morning Guinness mentality. But it's quintessentially Irish, and it's just unique. It's so unique in the world that I think it's the perfect thing to talk about with the bullshit holiday that is St. Patrick's Day.
It is a bullshit holiday. Let's crack a beer really fast. You want to? Yeah. We're both drinking out of cans, which I think is important, and I doubt there's snobbery around that because we don't have a draft at our house, unfortunately.
Oh man,
That's so great. That's so good.
Oh, I just tell you, you think to yourself, it's going to be good, and then you see it.
I always, you look at the color and all this stuff, and we'll get into Guinness as a coloration and all the things. Yeah, cheers, my man.
Salud.
Look at that. Yeah, look at that. Salud. Sláinte. So, you look at the color, I think one of the biggest misconceptions with Guinness is that it's this bigger, huge beer and really bitter and it's not. Let's just start the podcast off with that is not what Guinness is, despite the darkness of its color.
Despite the black soul, it's a light beer. Like technically speaking, it's 4.2% alcohol, right? It's actually a session beer, meant for all day consumption, sitting at the pub. And so it's filling. Don't get me wrong. The rate limiting factor on Guinness isn't that you get drunk; it's that you're full. It's like eating a loaf of bread every time you have one.
Well, but at the same time, though, the calorie count in Guinness is low compared to so many other beers. Right. That's the other thing I don't think people know.
No,
I guess the people who listen to Som TV podcast are very smart. They know, but other people do not know this, and so.
Way to suck up to your audience with that. That was very good.
I'm a big fan. It's mostly just my family that listens. And I know I joke about this, but my mom's doing well. I mostly joke about this all the time. And for the listeners, I don't hear enough from you. So I'm not convinced that anyone but my mom listens to this podcast.
Yeah.
So do we want to do a little bit on St. Patrick's Day? Do we want to riff? Should I give you 1 minute to talk about St. Patrick's Day? What it means, what it is?
No, you talk about what it means and what it is, because I'll tell you what I think it means and is wear something green that is not a good color on most people, by the way, if we're being honest. Like everybody looks washed out in that kind of like shamrock green, right? So it's just a shit color to begin with. Two, it's almost exclusively, if I'm not mistaken, like a made-up American holiday, right? Like I actually was in Ireland once on St. Patrick's Day, and it was just a day. Like no one.
Were you putting green food coloring in the River Liffey, like they do in Chicago? And they were just like, "Hey, excuse me, you're under arrest."
Right. What are you doing, you idiot? No.
So that's just the history. I mean, I want to bitch about something. If you listen to the pod, you know that I keep fish and animals, and I'm a weirdo. I've kept snakes and lots of. I don't know where this is going, but it's going towards supposedly St. Patrick. Quite a long time ago, he rid Ireland of snakes.
He drove the snakes out of Ireland.
He drove the snakes out of Ireland. Now, if you know anything about the fossil record in Ireland, this is like give me 60 seconds. I don't want to go more than 60 seconds. There were never snakes in Ireland. It never happened. So clearly this is a metaphor for driving out something else. The pagans, I hope to God, not some other religion I don't want to name. I hope that it's just, some metaphorical of driving out evil. But I still stand by that snakes are not evil. So I think this holiday starts on shaky ground and then continues on shaky ground. In Cleveland, where I'm from, they do huge parades for St. There's you can get sauerkraut. I don't know why sauerkraut, all sorts of cabbage and stuff on the street, and not sauerkraut, and corned beef and all of these different things are everywhere.
Yeah,
and big Irish community. But you're right. I've been in Dublin on St. Patrick's Day, and they look at you like, "Good morning." Like it's not a thing.
Exactly. It was the most kind of like eye-opening thing, and I think that we all know that being kind of isolated over here on our own little continent and being kind of egomaniacs as we are, we think that the world celebrates as America celebrates. Like, we don't understand why everyone else doesn't have Thanksgiving. It's like,
right.
So myopic. So I'm in Ireland and I get off the plane. Like I was flying London to Dublin and, it's the short, and I was like, this is going to be so great. I'm in Ireland. I'm there on business. So I'm spending, frogs leap money back in the day. So I was already excited about that. And then two, I was like, oh, this is going to be so amazing. And it's just like, it was just a Tuesday, it was nothing.
Right.
It was nothing about it at all.
I just picture you running shirtless with an Irish flag tied around your neck, and you're just running down Grafton Street in Dublin, and everyone's looking at you like, oh, this guy's on a stag party. I get it. This guy's a Brit.
Right. Like I was there for some big, soccer tournament or some amazing football tournament would be great, but no.
I will say big rugby games in Ireland are a much bigger thing than St. Patrick's Day. Guinness, much like, I bitch a lot that rosé is not a summer thing. It's an all year round. Guinness is an all year, always you can drink. To me, it's like you said, the alcohol's lower. It's a great, towards the end of the night when everyone doubles down because they've drank too much and they start drinking harder stuff.
Yep.
Guinness is the way to go.
Totally.
Go to Guinness. It's lower. You're not going to regret it in the morning if you have one more of those versus whatever bourbon somebody starts getting out. Go to the Guinness. Yes. It would be my recommendation.
And it does. It's like, it feels like there's something about it that gives us that kind of satisfying, obviously the nitro element to it, right? Which came about, I think in the 30s, late 30s, early 40s is when they came up with the draft system with mixing it with nitrogen. And it the texture is amazing that it works as a late in the evening drink because it's got that satisfying, creamy kind of quality to it. Yet, as you and I can also attest, it's a great breakfast beverage as well.
It certainly is.
It's just fabulous. It was about, I guess it was 1998 when two of my buddies, Matt Wilkinson, who I grew up with, and David Botsett, grew up the next town over, we decided we needed to go to Ireland for the sole purpose of drinking Guinness, right? I mean, we were college. It was we were going to stay in youth hostels. We were taken off from work, and it was like we're going to go out and just do this thing right. We bought cheap tickets out of O'Hare to Dublin, row 72, BC,
right.
and F, where you can't recline at all, and right next to the shitter. And it was just but I think it was it was not cheap. The tickets weren't cheap, but we had this goal of we're going to get to Ireland. We're going to rent a car and just basically loop the island and spend time in the small little towns and fishing villages and everywhere we can. But we had one rule. By the time the trip was over, each of us have to have spent more on Guinness than we did on airfare. Like that was rule number one.
I love the kind of stuff guys do when they have your mom is no longer in charge of you and you're like, here's what I'm going to do with my freedom.
Right. Freedom and whatever disposable income I have. And then two, we had
girls do not do this. I just don't believe that young women do this kind of dumb stuff, though I'm fully in support of your actions.
And we, of course, had to have our first Guinness down by 10. And I decided, and this was Jason when I was really, I was thinking I was a bit of an artist. I wanted to sit outside the cafe where James Joyce wrote, I had all this stuff. And I found, and look at this, buddy, if you can see this on the camera, I found my journal from that trip where I took notes on every day, where we drank Guinness, who we met. And I thought that this was an appropriate passage to start it off. And you can also see what a great writer I've become, because it was really kind of like one of those moments when I realized, boy, I really do have a gift for writing. So we had just landed in Dublin. We took a taxi from the airport downtown. We were walking around looking for a pub. And here's where the quote begins. After blocks and blocks of walking, we found an open pub, the Bachelor's Bar, it was called. We sat down and ordered our first Guinness ever in Ireland. It poured magnificently slow and procured a rich, creamy head like I had never seen before. We sipped, we paused, and we sighed. The kind of sigh reserved for a great meal or a wonderful shit. End quote. So, as you can see, I was knocking on the door of James Joyce like way back in the day.
Oscar Wilde, who?
Right?
For real.
That was Joycean at its very best. That could have been the opening of Ulysses, I feel like. So
I feel like that was Ulysses. I think you just ripped it off, to be honest with you. I think the first chapter ends with "or a good shit." I'm pretty sure.
Hey, listen, there's call me Ishmael, best of times, worst of times. It ended with a sigh reserved for a good shit. I feel like this
is why it's trouble having Jonah, you and I are friends, and that makes it hard to have a straightforward let's nuts and bolts talk about beer podcast.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. This is good. This is great. So I went and I was filming a PBS travel show with a lot of the same team that we still make all the stuff we do now.
Yep.
And I'm not going to name this property, okay? But I am going to say it's one of the nicest, oldest hotels with a great golf course in Ireland.
Okay.
And so we're filming there, and we go to have this meeting in this tea room in this very old space, and we have an incredible meeting with the general manager, and he sits down with us with this very, very thick but refined accent, and he says, "Why don't we get us a couple of drinks? Start the meeting,
Oh,
and so
that's a fabulous imitation, by the way. I was going to say,
it's really good.
Listener, turn the volume up, please, because you're going to want to hear that again. I was just transported right back to Dublin. Wow.
Oh,
wow.
God.
Okay, one more time.
So he sits down and he says, no, I can't do it. No, I'm too bad. So he gets some drinks. He brings a Guinness and an Irish whiskey for each one of us. And by the way, this is a meeting to figure out, I think it's 10 a.m., maybe 9:30 a.m.
Yep.
It's a Guinness and an Irish whiskey for all of us. And we're going to talk about the week's shooting. So here's we're going to film with this chef, and we're going to do this. We're going to go out on the golf course, and then we're talking, and in comes another Guinness, and in comes another Irish whiskey. So it's we're doing this. Okay, that's 4 drinks total.
Yeah, that's a lot.
By the time we're done, everybody's had about 7 total. So 7 of a variation of whiskeys and Guinnesses. We stumbled out of this meeting, and him, tie, suit, he just stands back up and he goes, well, I've got to go meet with my beverage director, and then just leaves.
Yeah.
And we looked at each other like, this is going to be a week, boys.
Yeah.
It's like, holy smokes. And so, but then from that point on, though, that was the first Guinness that I had outside of, when you're going through Heathrow or you're going through Dublin, flying through, where I was in country, had this Guinness. And I do want to say, much like people who have been to Ireland will tell you, it does taste different there. It is incredibly delicious. It's not just the environment. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I'd say that, I hear that a lot here in Napa, where people come and visit a winery, or they'll be like, oh, I bought your wine when I was in Napa on my honeymoon with my wife. And I bought it again in St. Louis after a terrible day of work, and it didn't taste the same. And I'm always like, well, that's mostly because of where you were and what you were doing. However, The Guinness one is kind of legit. Like, it is different. And one thing that I was surprised by, and I don't know if Jason, it was back in 98, of course, and I'm sure it's gone through several marketing iterations, but they were just starting the served extra cold Guinness draft, right? Where the tap is frozen, right?
It has ice on it. Yeah.
It has ice on it. And it was just like, we went to Ireland thinking that we were going to drink room temperature Guinness the entire time. And
well, they have that too.
Of course. But like, I was also kind of like floored by the fact that there was this extra cold version. So we tried it, but we drank them all different ways. And every experience was a little different. But I will say unequivocally, it is a different experience, a different taste experience having a Guinness in Ireland. And I think you went to the factory. Did you not go to the brewery?
I did.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We filmed there and did both the touristy version of it and the back version of it, which, it's the amount of beer they make there is pretty staggering. I can't, I couldn't believe it. And I knew, not to say I know much now, but I knew considerably less about alcohol and production and all that stuff then. And I was just blown away by and we went to an area where they make beer that's primarily for the Central African market.
Yeah.
Much more tannic, much more dark, just a very, very, I say a flavor that sort of hits you in the face. And they tested for years and years and years. And that part of the world just really likes it to have much more, I think it just a bigger body. And it was really interesting to taste the way they change Guinness for different markets.
Yeah.
From what I gather, North America gets the same kind of brew, I guess, as they do in most of Europe. They do have different versions, that you find there that you don't find here.
Yeah, foreign extra stout and those sorts of things.
Yeah, all that stuff. So let's start with what makes this beer so special. There's a lot of dark beers.
Yeah.
And I think most beers that are dark, they don't taste anything like this.
No.
They just don't. And I don't proclaim to be a beer expert, but I certainly have drank a bunch of it.
Yeah.
And so I can say, that there is this, you look at a Guinness, you can't see through it at all. I mean, it's completely jet black, like the Trojan Midnight, and
black.
You can't see anything.
It's black like your heart,
line.
Jason. Just like your heart. Right. It is black and you can't see through it. It certainly looks like it wants to rip out your soul. It's Beelzebub's eyes. It is jet black and feels like it's death incarnate.
What makes it so special? How can they make it so dark without it hitting you in the face so hard with that caramely, thing that a lot of these beers do have?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, it was based on like the original beer they brewed was a porter, right? That was, really just kind of famous in England for the porters that worked in London were just favored this dark beer. And so, when Arthur Guinness gave up on producing an ale and instead went to a porter, you can kind of see that evolution towards where it goes to now, right? But to me, the question is kind of analogous to like if we were thinking about like how can you have a Shiraz out of Australia, or maybe a Rhone wine, where a Syrah-based wine, where the color is so dark and it's so purpley red and almost foreboding, that yet still can make an ethereal, lighter feeling wine. And I feel like that's what Guinness does. It tricks you a little bit with the dark color, right? You come into it with so much expectation that that's going to equate to bitterness and power, and it really is a lighter beer. And it's sweeter, It's got that sweet barley, that sweet kind of malted element to it. The texture is also a bit, because it's creamy, because it has a palate weight and a mouthfeel to it. To me, it takes away this idea of bitter astringency and flatters the sweeter elements of the beer. So I don't know, man. It's just, I think this is also why it's not replicated successfully, right? Like, there's other, stouts with nitrogen packs in the can and trying the same kind of thing, but it's just one of a kind. You can't replicate it, which I think is also what makes it kind of special, right? Like, that it's not duplicatable, or at least not that I've seen successfully yet.
I've never had anything like it. I've had things that are close.
Yeah.
I've had things that are like, I don't think copying Guinness is a good idea because you're ultimately going to fail as a brewery.
Right.
And I think real beer masters and brew masters would totally agree with this, that you can make dark beers and make something different. Don't even try to copy it.
Right.
Should we get into a little of the history of this Arthur Guinness?
Yeah. We've both been to the place. I think it was it St. James Gate? I think is where it was.
That's right. St. James Gate. Yep.
And, there's something that's kind of spectacular just with the idea that Arthur Guinness signs a 9,000-year lease, on the property. I mean, it's just like, who signs a 9,000-year lease? It's just like, all right, so this guy's obviously already thinking a little bit kind of beyond where everybody else was, but he's tucking in with this idea that he's going to, at the time make an ale and make beer, but he already saw the importance of export, right? Which I just think is also far reaching. I mean, how many years ago is this? 17? It says it on the can somewhere. 1759. 1759. Guys already thinking about export.
Well, I also think, not to make it too heavy, but I mean, if you think about not even just the recent troubles and all that, but just Ireland as a country, its lack of identity as a country, going back to finally having an identity as a country, it's an incredible thing and I think this is why Guinness is so important. The Irish have certain things that they've held to, and obviously their beer, their whiskey, their horses. There's so many things that they are so good at and so passionate about. And I just think Guinness is one of these things that if you look at Ireland's history of trying to have an identity of their own.
Yeah.
And it's a constant thing. I mean, it's still going on. It's and that is a whole other topic. But for Guinness, for him to be able to have the foresight and to create an identity for the people in this country, though it is it's a very large produced thing, it's I'm sure very corporate, it still has this like every person can go, yeah, that's ours. That's mine.
Yeah.
And yet it's gone out as this sort of bastion of Ireland to the entire world. So this tiny little country, space-wise, not culture-wise, because it's enormous culture-wise, has this, unrepeatable, incredible history in a glass.
Yeah.
And like you said, the 9,000-year lease, I wonder, in 9,000, what did they got? They got 8,800 or 8,000.
You're not good at math. Let's just say they have a long way to go. I mean,
someone's going to be pissed off and they're going to be like, in 9,000 years, they're going to be sitting at a table with the new alien investors and they're going to go, God damn it.
Time to renegotiate this lease. Yeah.
The city of Hong Kong, Dublin, or whatever it's called then. They're going to be very pissed off they didn't make a longer lease.
Right, when the Martians are here. I just want to paint a picture, though, too, because, see, listener, I know that you can't see us, but Jason and I can see each other. And watching him try to do math just now, trying to subtract 9,000 from the difference of 1759 to 23. That was pretty brilliant. I don't even think with a calculator.
Was it better than my Irish accent, or was it worse? What would you call it?
I'm going to say what I want to see next is Irish accent doing math. I feel like is the next level.
Oh boy!
Oh, listener, you're in for a treat on this one. But kind of circling that back, I think that you can see that like it is exactly that. Like it's a love letter from Ireland and about Ireland to the rest of the world, right? And I think that's what we both love about wine, and in this case, beer, and of course, other beverages like whiskeys and scotch and rum, is that it's the one kind of cultural identity that's a consumable, right? That you can actually export to the world. Like you and I can sit here and do a podcast on the best carbonara we've ever had in Rome, but we can't share it with someone, right? Like you've got to go there and get it and have it in the spot. Like food doesn't transport the same. It doesn't export the same. But this beverage is actually kind of Ireland, right? And because it's so closely identified with the people and who they are and what this cultural identity is, it's actually an exportable version of Ireland. And so it really has, like wine does and other things, it transcends the idea of just a good beer to something so much more meaningful, right? And because we consume it and we put it in our bodies and it becomes a part of us, we have a more, I mean this sincerely, like a more intimate relationship with it than if we were to be reading a book written by someone from Ireland or listening to a song written in Ireland. So I just think it's amazing to see how it has kind of traveled the world, and that goes back to Arthur's early kind of adoption of export, right? When he couldn't feed and quench the thirst of a thirsty isle, he's already thinking about export, not just to the UK and not just nearby, but he was the Caribbean, right? And Africa, South America. Like it traveled far and wide very quickly because of his kind of early understanding of the importance of people, I think, craving this idea of they visited a far off place by having this beer, which is just trend setting for the day, right? And certainly wineries were doing it and things were happening in the wine space, but not not to this degree and not with this kind of, I think, ambition.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, too, a lot of alcohol, Madeira or rum or any of these things, they have a very, the military helps spread it around.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Guinness is commerce spread it around, in a way that's different than a lot of the other beverages that we drink, where it was a ration or it was an energy or a food. And I think with Guinness represents, look, you go to the pub, you're off. You're not working. You are in this, it's like this leisure type of a thing. And I think in America, we don't have pub culture. We don't understand what it means. And in Ireland and much of the UK, they have this, you go to the pub.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so most Americans consume pub culture from like Ted Lasso, and they just think, okay, everybody just sort of lives in these pubs and it's a great thing to cut to, for a quip, for a line. Yeah. But pub culture is a real thing, outside of this, where people go and they are true regulars and they have their pub and they watch their games or matches, as they would say. And, Guinness has been a part of that. And it's so ingrained that it's not only you go there for the person behind the bar, you go there for the drink you drink, you go there for your sports team, but you can't separate Guinness from a lifestyle, and that's a really interesting thing, because if you're in Paris, you're probably going to go, you might get a different drink every time you go to your place where you go.
Yeah.
I bet you if you go to a pub in Ireland and you've been going there for 10 years, you're drinking the same drink every time and it's waiting there for you, when you get there. So,
and if you did order something different, they would be like, oh my God, he's got cancer. He's dying. There's no way.
Like, they're like, Boddington's, wait a second.
Boddington's, right. Like that would be a far stretch, right? Not even just like something totally off the rails. But I think that's what's really interesting, like Ireland, and what I discovered on my trip there was that pub culture is a real thing. And being a tourist in these small towns sometimes, on the far side of the island, we would walk in and obviously we're quickly identified as both young and foreigners.
The fish stop swimming.
Yeah, yes, exactly. like an old Western where everyone turns and looks. But
do you walk up and just drop a little bag of coins on the bar?
Exactly.
You're like, this'll do.
This'll do. Keep them coming. We've quickly found that after your first pint, if you just had any interest in the bartender or anyone sitting next to you, and you just even remotely friendly and interested in them, like instantly you were kind of brought into the culture for the night. Like you were a part of that pub for the night, right? And it was such an amazing experience that we couldn't get enough. We were, morning pub, lunch, afternoon pub, dinner, late night pub, right? And it just was an incredible experience of understanding how much the pub meant to a culture, to a people, to a society, to a neighborhood. I will say I'm kind of envious of it, right? Like as much as we've got our watering holes and our places here in Napa, like Compline or Cadet, or restaurants like Don G's, like, and we can go and be regulars and they know to send out the fried olives and a pizza right away. It's different than a pub where you go there for things you're celebrating, for moments of sorrow, for moments of joy. And you go there to get shit-faced, which I think is also a reality. The whole phrase, mind your P's and Q's, is mind your pints and quarts, like, which is what the wife would say to her husband as he would leave and head down to the pub for his after his evening tipple, was mind your P's and Q's meant mind your pints and quarts. Don't drink too much tonight that you come home schlockered. And so I just think that, like, we still use the phrase mind your P's and Q's, but we don't really know what it is until you're sitting at Tynan's Bridge House pub in Kilkenny thinking to yourself, man, I've had 17 of these pints. I wonder if that's too many. And then someone tells you about mind your P's and Q's. I think we should start a pub. I think we should have the Som TV pub somewhere. The Jason Wise Jonah Beer pub.
Basically, it exists in my house already. But I will say, I think you're damn right. I would love to do that. If you're listening to this and you would come to the Som TV pub, let us know, Mom.
Yeah. So and ask your mom if she'll invest.
Yeah, my mom. Yeah, Mom, please invest. I know you have a bunch of things in your freezer. Can we use that? All right. Whatever. That's an inside joke that my mom will get.
Whatever she didn't spend on braces for you, I feel like we can go ahead and take as a look at that picket fence of white teeth you've got. My goodness, that is just listener. It is a stunning smile.
We're still paying it off, boyo. So let's talk about some other stuff with Guinness. Now, can we get into the Guinness Book of World Records, since I'm 3/4 of a pint in right now and I'm starting to feel it?
Yeah. I think that's probably another thing that it's one of those moments that hit me like a lightning bolt when I discovered that the Guinness Book of World Records, which growing up in the era I did, we had television shows like Ripley's Believe It or Not, and, all of these shows. Guinness had its own show, and it was just, I never understood that it was associated with the beverage, right? With the beer and the brewery. And it was the director of the Guinness brewery at the time. And this was in, I think, the 40s or 50s. I can't remember exactly when. And he was at a shooting tournament with some other people, and they were arguing over what was the fastest game bird in all of Ireland, and exhausting all the resources they could to settle this bet over weeks to try to settle what was the fastest game bird in all of Ireland. They realized that there was a tremendous amount of unknown best of or fastest of or biggest of. And so they asked around and found out that in pubs all the time, there's arguments breaking out over two patrons, and the bartender was usually the one that settled the wager as to, what is the fastest game bird? Now, it necessarily wasn't that the bartender knew, but whatever he said was kind of gospel. So they hired two twins, actually, who were doing research for a university in Ireland, in Dublin, and said, would you help us compile like a books of facts? Like, what is the fastest and the biggest and the largest? And they did. And as a promotional book to give to bartenders who were good Guinness customers, they started circulating the Guinness Book of World Records. And, now, of course, they've got offices in New York and Tokyo, London, Dublin, all over the place. And you can request a Guinness Book of World Records officiant to come to almost anything you're going to do where you're going to, quote, break a record. And if they certify it, you're in the record books, man. And there's something it's kind of like what Michelin tires did, with the Michelin guide for restaurants, and what these guys did, it's just genius. And we still use it today. Like, we still use that phrase, like, I bet that's in the Guinness Book of World Records. And sure as shit, it solved a lot of... Google has kind of, unfortunately, supplanted it with a much less sexy version than a bartender pulling a book out from behind the bar and flipping through the pages to discover what is the fastest game bird in all of Ireland. But, I still like the old version. Do you have a Guinness Book of World Records, by the way?
Well, this is an amazing surprise you weren't ready for. I have a Guinness officiant that's about to join the podcast, and I am going to do the most bad math in a bad Irish accent. Okay, ready?
I feel like we don't even need the officiant. I feel like we can just give it to you right now.
There was just that one. It was just that. Yeah. Just the idea of me doing it. I broke the record. Guinness, when I was a kid in high school, the new Guinness book came out the next year.
Yeah.
And everybody'd be like, oh, that's the fattest guy that ever lived. And, oh, look at the shortest lady. It was all very carnival-esque. But then you'd find out somebody ate 3 bicycles. And you're like, wait a second. This guy ate the most bicycles? What the hell? It started devolving into these chaotic records that were not it wasn't like the person who could lift the most weight.
Yeah.
It was like this guy has held up the most ducks. You're like, wait a second, what? He can hold the most ducks? Is that a thing? I don't even know.
Do you remember what were your top images, or because I remember getting the new one and we would flip through it, and I can tell you right now the 4 things that I would look for first in the new edition of the Guinness Book of World Records. Let me try. Okay, go for it.
Whether or not the 2 fat guys on motorcycles, the brothers, were still the fattest twins of all time.
Fattest twins
Please
of all time.
Tell me that's one of them.
That was number 1. And they were always on those mini bikes, and with ass cheeks a limbo over both sides, and just
it's always sad too, because if you go to Wikipedia, you find out one of them had to have the roof removed when he died or something to get him out.
What did you expect? I think he's like, look, yes, they had to remove the side of the house to crane my ass out of bed, but c'est la vie. Yeah.
I love everyone listening to this podcast. This is literally what you would talk about in a pub. Okay. So you're just listening to Jonah and I just have a pub conversation. So what else was there? I remember the shortest woman, the little tiny woman.
Yep.
I remember that. She had this little dress. She looked like a doll.
Yes.
And she was very small.
Yes.
And that was always one of the things that I remember.
You're 2 for 2 right now. You're 2 for 2.
Okay. Geez. The next one's gonna be where I'll probably fail. The tallest man was always the one, and the poor guy, he had all sorts of problems, but he was incredibly, very tall.
He was tall.
He was a very tall individual.
Very astute. Way to paint a word picture there, Jason. Way to paint a word picture.
I'm like James Joyce as well.
Yeah, you're quite Joycean.
Except I want you to think about everything.
Tallest Man would have been fifth on my list, but there was two more that were again kind of. I think your version of carnival is exactly right, and one of them was world record for smoking the most cigarettes at once.
Oh yeah, the guy with his lips in his mouth, and he had like hundreds of cigarettes inside in that circular fashion. Yeah,
exactly. And they were all.
I tried to break that in college one night at a party.
I would pay to see on live TV. That's what we got to go to next. That one was one. Cigarette guy was one, and then world's longest fingernails.
Yeah, that lady who had the curly fingernails.
Yes.
Oh, I forgot about that. She must have been fun to be married to.
Oh man, those 4 images still kind of haunt me from day to day, time to time. Where, like, you think those absolute like fingernails were just, and the cigarettes one was the one that felt like you could challenge it, right? Like you can't challenge the fattest and the shortest and the tallest.
No,
the cigarettes was the one you were like, you know what? I think if we can get like 20 of my buddies around, let's figure if we can get more cigarettes lit.
No, I mean, I just don't think that's a smart idea. Listeners, don't try to break the cigarette Guinness Book of World Record one. What about the lady with the longest hair? Do you remember that one?
Long hair.
The woman who had the hair that was like bonkers long. Yeah, anyways. Oh, God.
Bonkers.
It's so funny. And
bonkers long. So you're just really you're just nailing the adjectives today.
You know,
bonkers long.
I will never forget when I left school in 4th grade. They called me one of the great wordsmiths of my generation.
Of your generation, yes, exactly. They said we're going to really miss him after he's gone.
That's exactly what happened. See, the Guinness is kicking in. It's good.
I will say you can look at the Guinness Book of World Records and kind of what that did. And then there was like that next level of marketing that these guys did, which was the My Goodness, My Guinness advertisements.
Which are great posters.
Great posters, right? Guinness is good for you, which I think is also a wonderful element about truth in advertising yesterday and today, you know, where we've got 13 warnings on everything. The state of California thinks this will destroy your brain cell, whatever it is, you know. And then
I remember them saying there's lots of iron in Guinness. It's good for women.
Yes.
And like, it's like, okay, all right. But so is iron.
Yeah. And I think, and this was Matt Wilkinson, one of my compatriots on this trip, told us that nursing mothers in hospitals were given Guinness, like a ration of Guinness every day to promote health and lactation. And so I just think that like wonderful moments like that where you think, man, can you imagine today Miller High Life being given to nursing mothers as a way to, as a lactation aid? Like it's just, you know, it is the champagne of beers. I get it, but I just don't think that's gonna fly.
No, I would strongly advise not giving Miller High Life to nursing mothers. But I will say, as soon as they're done, they can drink whatever they want because it's a hard process. So Miller High Life. Everybody in college had that poster, had one of those My Goodness, My Guinness posters, you know, like with the ostrich with the Guinness bottle in its neck or any of those things. I mean, it's amazing to think how ingrained this stuff is for us, you know?
Right. And you had the toucan, like, you know, and it was like...
yep, the toucan one, yeah.
What does a toucan and an ostrich and an alligator have to do with an Irish brewery? But it works so well. And it just... the kind of like the mad genius that started out with, you know, obviously in the 1700s, and it's all the way up to, and today's version, right? And I don't know if I haven't been there to see it, but when I visited the brewery back in 98, it was a small little thing, you know. Now it's like 7 stories tall. Like it's like the Disney World of visitor centers, you know. And it's like they're always thinking and moving ahead, you know, and they're not going to rest on any laurels, even though they've had so many great home runs throughout the years. My Goodness, My Guinness, and the Guinness Book of World Records to me go down in almost like the pantheon of great advertising and great marketing.
Love it. So to end this, which we have to do at some point, what should we eat with Guinness? Let's talk about, I mean, for me, whenever I'm so used to tasting like really good French fries in my mouth when I have Guinness.
Yeah.
I mean, like pub fries are like one of the greatest things you can eat with this. What do you pair with Guinness? So what are your thoughts? What should we eat?
There's obviously the corned beef and cabbage kind of route, right? Like where you can kind of go with that route. But for me, it was at the pub when we were, you know, traveling around. It was always like the bangers and mash, right? Like for me, it was just some really good sausage, simple little potatoes, cold cannon or something of this style, and just diving in, right? Because it does have acidity and it does have savoriness. So it is a beer that sometimes feels like a meal, like you're having a loaf of Roman meal bread, but at the same time, it has enough savoriness to it that it actually it works great. So for me, it's always that kind of bangers and mash kind of vibe to it.
I would go, if you gave me, it might be one of my death row meals. Like if you were to ask me on any given thing to have shepherd's pie and Guinness, that for me is any one of those kind of savory meat and potato, peas, carrots type of pies that they make just incredible amounts of in Ireland.
Yeah.
And to have that with Guinness, there's something amazing how it kind of cuts through, the fat and the salt and all that stuff in there. But I just can't even tell you how many great nights I have had with that. I will say it goes pretty well with fish and chips too. It holds up to vinegar, which is something that a lot of things do not. When you put vinegar, if you have fish and chips with wine, everyone's like, all right, so fried fish would be great with champagne. Now put that malt vinegar on there, and then you're like, champagne is terrible. But I will say the Guinness works great. So those would be my call. Fish and chips, the mushy peas.
Fish and chips, that's a genius call. And I've had that before, and that works exceedingly well. And you're right. And it's the mushy peas too that you've got. And you have to oversalt those mushy peas because, by definition, they're mushy peas. But it's
just baby food if you don't oversalt it.
That's right. But that is such a good idea. That's such a good pairing. I would also say that as you experience and I experience, a pint of Guinness pairs excellently with 13 more pints of Guinness. So, it's also just a beautiful session beer where you can just sit back and just rip through a man and not even think about dinner. But I hope
there is somebody nursing a baby listening to this podcast right now, thinking, I know what I'm having for lunch.
You heard it here from Doctors Beer and Wise that it's a good lactation aid.
Yeah, love it. Jonah, it is always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. Be nice to snakes. I don't think we need to cast snakes out. They're not your enemy.
They're not your enemy.
All right.
And thank you for having me on once again. It's always a pleasure. We laugh. We always have a good time. And I want to throw something out there, though, just for your listener. Well, for a listener, I'm sure your mom's already seen it. But if you haven't seen Saving the Restaurant, which Sarah and I watched just the other night, it is an outstanding film. It's really well done.
Thanks.
And it absolutely made me just realize what a hero of our industry Bobby Stuckey is. Obviously for what he did in the film and how he was such a champion, and he was one of many. But you just see him, like how he's such a hospitalitarian. It's a really good film. I have to say that on air, and because it was really well done. And Nadine deserves all the credit. So I just want to make sure she hears that too.
Podcast producer Nadine. It's great. She really does. Well, Jonah, you're a saint, and I'm very happy to have you on. This is great. Whenever we do this, we have an outline. We just don't follow it.
Yes, yeah.
It's really good. All right, I can't wait to have you on again, bud. Really appreciate you coming on.
You got it.
And everybody, don't forget to go to somtv.com, $49.99 for an entire year. We hand make all this stuff, and it means a lot for all of you who listen. If you love this podcast, however you listen to it, please write a great review. Give us 5 stars, whatever the star rating is. Write a review. That stuff matters too. Big time to us. So everybody be safe. Have a safe St. Patrick's Day. If you're in Ireland, do not dye any rivers green. They will think you're nuts. But if you're in Chicago, hey, take your shirt off and jump in. Okay, everybody, be safe.